Welcome back to Newsday. Thank you for staying with us. International rating company Moodys and the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria say Nigeria's economy will suffer if government goes ahead to implement a newly proposed windfall tax on banks in the country. The Senate had last Wednesday given expedited passage of President Tinubu's request to amend the Finance Act in order to impose a one-time 50% windfall tax on banks' foreign exchange profits in 2023. Tinubu had said the money would be part of the revenue used to fund the 6.2 trillion supplementary budget. For a bit more on this, we're now being joined by Professor Pius Olarinwaju, who is President and Chairman of Council Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on this program.
Thank you, Professor, for joining us. Now, how might this new tax policy impact banks' willingness to engage in foreign exchange transactions?
Yes, I think there's need for, first of all, for us to have a background of what the bill is all about. For quite some time now, you know that the economy itself is having some challenges, and the current government is determined not to make use of ways and means again. And they are looking for funds to be able to meet their social obligation to the people. And because of that, it was being proposed that the Finance Act of 2023 should be amended. And initially, it was mentioned as a tax, that a tax should come in, whereby to tax all the foreign, the windfall that banks received during the last, within the last 1 year. But our position has been very clear that the windfall, there was a windfall, and there was a directive from Cibn too, that this should not be declared as dividend. We are aware of that. But there are a lot of things we need to take into consideration before we finalize this kind of position. And that's why we will be able to point out some of the challenges that is likely to arise as a result of this act. The act is now an act because it's no longer a bill. We learned the second day after the bill was presented, there was harmonization by both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and it has been passed into the law. So what we should be talking about is no longer even a bill. We should also be talking about an act. And the implication of that, and you mentioned 50%. Now, it's no longer even 50%. What is in the act is even 70%. 70%, and there are consequences that is going to follow. It will look like a double taxation to the banks. That's the way we view it, because these banks had already paid, they had already paid their tax before. They were not aware of this levy. The levy is somehow, the second point about this levy is that it's retroactive. It's something that is coming at the time when it's not even expected. And again, assuming the banking system is saying, oh, we are going to embrace it, the first thing remains that you move it again from 50 to 70, which means it's going to have a telling effect on the profitability of the banks. And moreover, we believe there is no element of fairness in the issue of the windfall, because from the look of things, objectively considered, you will realize that it's not only bank that had an advantage as far as the windfall is concerned. There are other units, there are other systems within the ecosystem that has benefited from that. Why singled out banks? These are some of the issues we have raised. And again, at this point in time, where we are even expecting foreign direct investment, it's likely to affect those people who might want to invest in Nigeria that, with all this policy coming into being, there is need for us to be careful. And more importantly, we have all celebrated the idea of a recapitalization of banks so that they can be able to finance large transactions. And I believe, the belief of the Institute is that if this is done now, and you are asking for recapitalization, most of the recapitalization for it to have meaning in our economy, we want foreign investment. And most of them at this critical time may not be willing because of the feeling that the banks are being overtaxed or being levied in this something. And remember that the target of the government again is that come 2030, we want an economy that we're talking of 30 billion $30 trillion dollars. Where do we get those dollars that we are not even, manufacturing in Nigeria? So these are issues. These are some of the critical issues which we have raised in our memo, and we are saying that if you want development, sustainable development in the economy, then we should be able. We are not saying that levy cannot be, can also not be charged. But our concern now is that let the levy be reasonable. There's a way there's a way the levy can be put in such a way that it won't have a detrimental effect on the banking profitability and the ecosystem as a whole. And we must not also forget that even those people we are trying to help, that is the critical sectors of the economy that that has suffered so much, especially the manufacturing, that has suffered so much because of this merge of the foreign exchange market. They also borrow from the bank. So indirectly, the bank will still carry some of the burden of those companies. For example, maybe a company that has taken a loan that runs into billion and is unable to pay, and there's no money to pay, and they've recorded losses. So the bank has no choice. They have no choice than to do a loan workout, or possibly give them a kind of a moratorium, a period of grace through which they can gather themselves before start paying. This is a burden, an inherent burden that the bank are still, going to carry, and that's why we are suggesting that. Even we are not saying we are not averse to issue of levy, let the levy be reasonable. And we know that we have a government that listens to the feedback from the populace. And we have the opinion that these levy should be reduced to say 40. Initially it was being proposed 40. All of a sudden it was moved to 70. And I think it's not good for our banking system at this critical moment, when they are making an attempt to recapitalize, the banks.
Thank you, Professor Olariwaju. So you have said now that it was originally discussed as 40%. It was moved to 70%. The executive, the president, had asked for 50%. The Senate has moved it to 70%. Do you know what this additional 20% is for? Are you aware if they have earmarked it for anything in particular when the legislators increased this levy? And also, when you say double taxation, you talked about the taxes that banks have to pay, and I think this is including the 30% income tax that banks have to pay. Now there's an additional 70% tax on foreign exchange gains. Are there any other taxes that you think, apart from the retroactive nature of this tax, any other taxes that you feel lean to this being double taxation? And more so, what is this money being used for by the government? Are you aware?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think we are all aware, in the sense that the government has been crying that there's no money to finance some of our developmental projects. We talk of bad roads are there. A lot of things that the government wants to do, there is no money. And this government had already proposed that they don't want to be using ways and means, which will further, bring about inflation within the system. So they have the need for the money. But what we are saying, in essence, is that it's better for us to have a consistent and a sustainable development rather than to overtax an area to the detriment of the other. So because it's likely to have a multiplier effect on the system. I mentioned the other time, now there are a lot of things that are coming up as this discussion is ongoing. Number one, initially it was tagged, that levy was tagged to the windfall. But now we are hearing that all foreign exchange transactions, by the time there are so many transactions that is foreign exchange transactions taking place in the bank. If you take 70% from that, the banks will run into crisis. And that is the bitter truth. So we are saying that the windfall is clear. It's known to everybody. We also want development, because bank is also part of the ecosystem. It is when it is well with the system that the banks also can stand. What we are saying, in essence, it becomes a double taxation. If, for example, they had paid their normal tax, and now you are bringing in a levy, and the levy is so detrimental to their profitability. That's the point we are trying to make. We all know that the government needs money to finance a lot of projects, social projects, roads, water system, even security that is, tormenting us within the country. At this point in time, they need the money. But in needing the money too, we must not go and overtax a sector. Because the problem with that is that, like I said, some of those problems they are trying to solve are being carried indirectly, by the banks already. Because most of those manufacturers and countries that are doing very well in this country today, they are not living on their own money, they are living on borrowed money from banks. And if they are making losses, definitely there is no way they can repay back the loan.
All right, Professor.
And that's why I said that even beyond... Yes.
Your points are very salient, what you just mentioned about the effect on banks. But I'm wondering what effect this could have on bank customers, because there could actually be a case where we have, with these international transactions and remittances, that this tax might lead to increased costs for bank customers. So what measures would you like to see put in place, besides, probably reviewing this windfall tax from the start to ensure that it doesn't fall on bank customers?
Like I said, if the program, the art should stay the way it is, there is no way in which it's not going to have, I did mention the other time that it's likely to have a multiplier effect, the effect that we cannot even determine for now. Because the thing continues to involve a lot of, there are a lot of implications that is likely to follow. Number one, banks, transactions is both domestic and international. And you will bear with me that when we talk of international, it's not just about windfall. Windfall is just an occurrence that occurred because of the margin of these things. There are other transactions that is taking place, within trade finance, fund trading and everything. What will happen to those ones is that the operational cost will increase. And banks too, because they are not Father Christmas, they are in the business to make money. They will want to pass some of those costs to the customer.
Sorry, Professor.
Already, the customers are already crying that the...
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a very quick question, because the banks, you've connected the banks to the manufacturing sector, which is suffering losses. However, banks made record profits last year due to the devaluation of the naira. So do you think that it is fair, because banks have made record profits because the naira devalued, that the government should use that money for the betterment of the wider Nigerian society?
Yes, like I said, objectively consider, we are not averse to using, because the government gave a directive, the Cibn gave a directive, even when the final accounts of banks were being prepared, that look here, this is a windfall, and we all know the implication of a windfall. Even in accounting, we call it extraordinary item, extraordinary profit that you are making this year. Don't rely on it, because it's not going to come next year. It's not going to come in the year after. We are saying that even if this levy is limited to that, the better. But what we are hearing from the heart, although we are still studying it critically, is that it's being extended to all foreign exchange transactions, all international transactions, beyond even the windfall. It should be limited to the windfall, because windfall is just once and for all. You understand? But if you extend it to all foreign exchange transactions in the banks, then definitely cost will increase. Definitely the cost of fund, will increase. And again, we already shouted that there is inflation within the system. We are also complaining that the rate of interest is very high.
Absolutely.
So all these things will make even what we are trying to solve, or the problem we are trying to solve, we might be creating another monster. And that's why we are saying that, yes.
Professor, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thankfully you've done justice to this topic, and we'd like to thank you for your insight. Professor Pius Olarinwaju, President and Chairman of Council of the